Good afternoon and welcome to Writers Morning Out. I'm Jody Savage, Regional Rep for 7 counties as part of the North Carolina Writers Network. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started. I want to thank first everybody who's making today's Slush File event possible. George Kaufman is our Zoom host, and Carol Phillips will take notes on the judges' comments. So many thanks to you both. Also, thanks to our judges and today's reader, whom I will introduce in a moment. Also, thanks to everybody, all 24 folks who submitted an entry to Slush Pile by the deadline. For today's event, we have the pleasure of hearing from 3 experienced editors who will respond to your first pages. And it's quite a treasure trove of first pages. We had 24 terrific entries for today, which may be a record for Writers Morning Out. So here's the premise. It's 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, and 3 editors must triage a pile of unsolicited manuscripts before they can go home for the weekend. They'll decide yes or no by reading only the first page. Will yours make the cut? Each entry will be read aloud, and at the point where each judge would stop reading, they will sound a noisemaker. When all 3 judges indicate they would reject the manuscript, our reader will stop reading. Tracy Crow from the Tracy Crow Literary Agency. Okay. Noah Swetzer, Associate Director from Bull City Press. Our third judge today will be Judith Stanton, who has been an English professor and a literary magazine editor and is now a novelist. Our reader today is Stevie Jane Parks, who doesn't need a noisemaker. She's going to be reading. Her background is in clinical psychology. She is also an abstract painter, and Stevie is narrating currently an audio book for a local author. So welcome to our judges and our reader, and our many thanks to all of you. The judges' comments at these events are always insightful, whether they're talking about your entry or somebody else's. So buckle your seatbelts for this fun ride. And also, just a reminder, if you are not a judge or the reader, could you please mute your Zoom at this time? All right, so here we go. Here's the hat. I'm shaking them up. Go. Tossing them around. Our first will be number 20. Number 20.
20 is called Swan Diver. Warren T. Jones started having misgivings about working as a temporary guard at the university's art museum when they brought in the caskets. That's what they looked like. Plain pine boxes, not quite adult-sized, casket size for older children, maybe. The queasy feeling in his stomach only got worse when he saw what was inside the boxes. They were carved wooden statues of several women and one man, about 3/4 the size of real adults. They looked like regular people in normal street clothes, but they were doing the most peculiar things. One lady was laying face down on the floor, but dressed for going out, holding her purse, wearing high heels. Another lady, dressed about the same, was turned upside down. But it was the figure of the man that gave Warren the heebie-jeebies. Dressed in a business suit, the man was standing on his tiptoes, leaning forward. His arms were stretched out over his head, and his tie and suit were flattened against him from the force of air as he fell. That's what he was doing, falling. Warren had even checked the title of the piece, Swan Dive. It was the man's eyes that were haunting Warren's nightmares. They looked terrified, but not just that. They looked excited, too, almost happy. Those eyes kept showing up in his dreams. For the last 2 weeks, he had been waking up screaming, "Don't jump!"
Well, neither one of us jumped in, or none of us jumped in. So I'll just go ahead and start. This was really different. It felt fresh to me. I was very curious as I was reading. I will say that I was curious enough to keep going all the way through, even though I never really completely had a clear vision of what these figures were, because if they were lying down or something, but then they were doing things, I was not completely clear on what these images actually were. I was a little bit confused. but I thought that it kept my curiosity going all the way to the end.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I was curious about it. It was a lot of like exposition. I had to like craft in my mind what all of these different figurines were looking like as we were going, and so it would have been the don't jump nightmare thing came at just the right time, because at that point I was sort of like, something needs to start happening, because the narrator keeps trying to explain what things look like, and I kind of just need like a break from that kind of information to like what's happening in with the person who's, you know what I mean, actually in this room. So you know, it's a little, it's not that it's wordy, that doesn't make sense, right? But in how I'm trying to describe it, it's like all the same kind of exposition. So if there was any recommendation I would make, is just even just one sentence in the midst of all of that that brings us back to, is it Warren? You know, brings us back to Warren and just says like, Warren's hands started to sweat or something like that. That just brought me back into the room with the character and returned to the figurines, I think, just to sort of break it up. But that's like you know, that's just a suggestion. You don't have to do anything we say.
Well, I'm with Noah and Tracy. It was so weird. It was and unusual. It was very intriguing. Um, but one of the things that I liked about it the most is that the weirdness is the underpinning for the weirdness is this very straightforward, plain prose style, and that made the weirdness weirder,
Mhm.
but it also invited the reader in.
Putting the word casket in your first sentence is a great way to go, because I was like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah. And then the
Yeah, the
next one
material.
was like child-sized caskets. I was like, here we go. So that was very well done.
Yeah, the material felt fresh,
Yeah.
different, something I hadn't read.
And here we go. Our second reading will be number 9.
This is called Lily in Oakland, Tuesday, October 3rd, 1938. The porter entered Lily's Pullman car from its rearward end, calling, "Next stop, end of the line, Oakland, California, end of the line." He always did that, calling out stops, though his car was packed with as though his car was packed with chatty, distracted passengers, when really it only held one passenger, and she was fully alert. "But isn't this train called the City of San Francisco?" "Yes, miss, that's what it is. That's surely what it is, the City of San Francisco." "Then why call it that if its last stop is Oakland?" "Now that I can't tell you, miss, unless it's that folks always likes to dream about San Francisco." He'd almost left her car when he turned to say, "Oakland, well, Oakland's more real." Lily got busy packing. More real was good enough for her. Later that day, she stepped down into the depot platform. She had boarded this train, a broken-hearted Jewish nurse, but here in the West, she'd be a clear-eyed Gentile philanthropist in search of deserving recipients. She was going to begin life anew. But if she'd known that sunny California could be so darn chilly, she'd be wearing something warmer than this light but stylish blue crepe dress. Other Easterners were standing clustered nearby on the platform, hugging themselves and shivering. Lily did no such hugging. She was keeping a tight hold of a small leather case that wasn't at all stylish, resembling, as it did, a nurse's bag. Besides, under that bag's false bottom lay over $30,000, soon to be wisely and generally distributed, if only she knew how.
This really worked for me on a lot of levels. Lily is really present emotionally. I'm very hooked by the broken-hearted Jewish nurse versus the clear-eyed Gentile philanthropist. And I particularly like the cliffhanger at the end about the huge amount of money hidden in the sack. So I think it captured my imagination and made me want to find out what's going to happen with Lily. How did she get here? What's behind her story?
I really liked the dialogue. I thought the dialogue was very, very engaging, and particularly the porter. The porter is like really well sketched out through language, and the aside about he always did that. I really, really liked that. Um, I got confused, and this is probably a Noah thing. I got confused with the phrase later that day she stepped down on the depot platform because I thought I was confused. Like, is that just another way of saying like once the train got there? Because later that day made it seem, because it seemed like he was calling out the last stop and she got off on the platform. So when it said later that day, I just got confused, and I'm just sharing that in case that's a thing that could be cleaned up a little bit, or if I'm just making a mistake.
You know, I
So.
agree with everything that Judith and Noah have said. I'm always harping to my clients and students to keep the reader grounded in time and place. And I thought this was a clever way of grounding the reader in place and time. So, but you know, as I got to the bottom, I really liked that last sentence. That really hooked me there. But when I got to the bottom, I had this feeling as an agent that I was probably going to find the better beginning maybe 3 or 5 pages in.
Mhm.
So I don't know why I thought that, but I will say that I really did appreciate being grounded in time and place from the beginning. And I love that dialogue. Very, very authentic sounding.
The third entry is going to be number 16.
The pay for carrying a single bag was $3.50. This was hard work for someone his size, but well above what he could make hunting lost golf balls in the woods next to the fairways. The clubhouse paid him only $8 a ball and resold them for a quarter. He'd outgrown his old bike and was saving for a new one he'd seen and the freedom it would offer. After good rounds, the colonel might crack a fleeting smile when she gave him $4. The other days, the days she'd missed a handful of greens or short putts, she skipped his tip.
This will be familiar from something I said earlier just today. And I sounded in on he wore his one colored golf shirt. That's where I sounded in. And it's really because of it's a lot of the same kind of sentence structure. And I understand that I'm being delivered a lot of very important information to set up the story. I'm going to steal something that Tracy just said because I think it's so smart. I'm like, I feel like the better beginning of this is going to be on the next page or the page after that. I understand that this information is going to be very important for the story, but perhaps there's a different way of delivering it. One suggestion I often make is when you have sentences like this, one after the other, even if you mix up the kinds of sentences, shorter and longer ones, if you follow a long sentence with a short sentence, it actually gives that short sentence even more sort of pop, and kind of delivers some emotional content, because then you kind of get a sense of like how the narration is skewing one way versus the other. And it feels like we're doing that when we say he didn't have a clue. So we're sort of in obviously with the caddy more than we are with the woman. And so by the time I got to he wore his one collar shirt, I kind of wanted something different. I wanted maybe a piece of dialogue or, something to upset the apple cart a little bit before we went back into the exposition.
Good. There's I was conflicted because I like the language in here at most of the time it sounds like a 12-year-old. I especially like she scared the bejesus out of him. A kid would say that, but I don't think a kid would think she had short, efficient, graying brown hair, predictably crowned with a white visor. That's
Yeah.
just not a child sentence.
Mhm.
And there are a couple of more tanned muscular calves. I just don't see that coming from him. And I was also worried, which this could be cleared up, how a 100-pound 10-year-old, 12-year-old boy would be caddying 18 holes um, and managing all that weight just as a practical matter. Needed an explanation. It's on wheels maybe, but I mean, he'd be huffing and puffing.
Yeah, I think Judith and Noah make some very fine points here. Because it had this Mrs. Robinson vibe, I was willing to give it all the way to the end.
Tracy.
I know. I just got outed for something, right? Yeah. So I was really curious. I thought, okay, today's Friday is a little slower than usual, so I'm going to give this one all the way. But I completely agree. I mean, by the time I got to the end, I thought, well, where would I have blown it? Where would I have, because I was really wanting to see where this was going to go. I did see a lot of the same things that Judith and Noah said. So please listen to them, and consider revising based on their comments. But know that that's where I was coming from. As an agent, I was curious. I thought, okay, now wait a minute, where are we going with this boy? And
All right, on to our next, which is going to be number 15. Number 15.
Is called Kidnapping, Espionage, and Dog Walking. Scooting around the marketplace, picking up a pacifier, Pampers, formula, a baby thermometer, a rattle, baby wipes, cereal, fruit pouches that squirted food, Caroline felt happier and more normal than she had in months. Suddenly, she had purpose. What a radical change from earlier in the day when her dark funk led her to the bridge over the Mystic. While she paused, contemplating Gerber jars, deciding if bottled food was acceptable to a baby his age, a lady brushed her shoulder and nudged her. "Excuse me," the interloper said as she lifted her Gucci sunglasses to give Caroline the once-over. Caroline avoided eye contact. The 30-something woman said, "Isn't it horrible about that baby? To think it happened down the street a couple of hours ago. What's this world coming to?" Caroline knitted her brow and gazed past the lady, wondering how to escape. Yet Caroline, curious about what this woman might reveal, stood still. The lady continued, "I heard another mother repeating what she'd heard another customer tell the produce manager while she was expecting the kale. Kale, personally, I hate the stuff. This garrulous mom frowned, clicking her nose before adding, "Anyway, a few minutes ago, all the channels carried it." She gauged Caroline for a reaction. Caroline remained impassive. "An Amber Alert," the talkative woman blurted. An image of Caroline's own mother darted through her mind as she listened. Caroline thought how much her Southern mom would despise this woman. Her mother hated silly women who jabbered incessantly to anyone in their path. Her mom would label this Boston blabbermouth a chatty Cathy if she were the recipient of this yakking. Caroline stuffed her fist in her mouth, biting her nails, and leaned in closer while avoiding direct eye contact.
I was curious. I liked the various rhythm of things. I liked the overall pacing. I was immediately hooked when we get to that first paragraph of her dark funk letter to the bridge over the Mystic.
It's
I
over
thought,
the Mystic, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I thought, wow, is she planning on jumping in the Mystic River? So
That was great.
that was worth me continuing on, even though I was wondering as it was going, okay, how much farther am I going to allow this to go? How much more? How much more? Come on, how much more? And then before I knew it, I was at the end of that first page. So, but that was what had hooked me, was her dark funk that had led her to the bridge over the Mystic.
I have sort of a technical question, and maybe my other editor friends can help me with this. As I kept hearing Caroline's name again and again, I realized that we needed to do that because it was a conversation between two women who would use the same pronoun, and it might get confusing. But then I wondered, because of the way it's being presented, why this couldn't have been written in first person from Caroline's point of view, because it seems to be really in Caroline's like world, right? Which I love, particularly because the title really set me up. like, that's part of the reason I was so engaged. I was like, let's get into it, right? Maybe Caroline, because and the lack of eye contact made me think that Caroline is the kidnapper, the spy, the dog walker, like all of that kind of stuff. And so I just wondered if there was an opportunity in another version just to tinker with using it in first person to sort of clean up some of that necessity of using the name over and over again. And it just seemed like, because it's so colorful, this story seems to me very colorful from Caroline's perspective, that you would then not need to do so many words to clarify who the different she's are. But really get into it when it's Caroline, the woman in the supermarket, and Caroline's mother. Then we have like three. And we're like, which one is which? So I just throw that out there.
Totally agree with Noah, and also with Tracy, for just hanging on in there to see what's happened. I did get to read a hard copy of it, and one thing that might also help the problem, Noah, you were having, is that if that in long second paragraph is broken up into a lot of different paragraphs,
Yeah, maybe.
so that you've got what the woman is saying, and then when Caroline is thinking about responding to it, her thought is its own line of dialogue.
That's a good idea. Yeah, I like
And
it.
yeah, but as one who changed a whole novel character to first person, because my first person was a he and the horse was a he, and it
Ooh.
got so confusing
Oh, okay.
that he had to be I so the horse could be he. It's a great suggestion.
I'm just glad to know I'm not the only one. So often I just wonder if this is my own failing.
No,
Okay,
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
great. Well, I
I
appreciate that.
I do like the detail in here. The
I do
detail,
too.
the Gerber jars, the kale. It's like, oh, okay, got it. That's in a woman's world.
Mhm. It reminds me a little bit of voices that I hear in stories by Lori Moore. These sort of
Oh.
very sort of idiosyncratic, often women. Yeah, I really
Mhm.
like that.
I liked how with the details in the whole Mystic River thing, but then that one while Paul's contemplating Gerber jars, deciding if bottled food was acceptable to a baby his age. And I thought, wow, I think that's a big clue that's just been dropped,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
you would know whether your baby is old enough or
Mhm.
ready for. So it just seemed like really odd detail to drop in there right after contemplating suicide. So, or possibly. So I thought I just wanted to compliment the writer, that I thought that was really ingenious. Really had me going. I thought, okay, I got to keep going. But yeah, I agree with Judith and Noah about possibly breaking up the paragraphs would help with all the she's and names and all that.
All right, thank you. Our next is going to be number 5.
I have birthed many times. Some of them lived, some didn't take a first breath. I've suckled and reared them till they became their own creatures, knowing enough to survive. I hunted for food, protected them from hunger, and went hungry myself. Some of them I carried in my jaws till they were strong enough to walk. Some of them I ate. My body grew tired of filling up and emptying, and I grew tired of the alpha males sniffing around me. I left one night and walked until I had no more strength. I found a hollow place in the cold woods where I could hide, me and my hunger. Sleep was all I craved, and peace from my ravaging thoughts. It wasn't a wolf or bear that found me, it was a small rat-like breed. She came sniffing around and barking at me. If I had a hair of strength, I would have bitten the muzzle right off her. The human came shortly after. I was carried and taken, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of fields, sped through the world in the back of a truck. I awoke in the white, cold place. Hands touched me. A needle pierced me. I slept. A cave with bars and many scents, and my body was sore, but there was food. Dry and tasteless as it was, I took it in as fast as I could chew. I was
Noise,
one of
noise.
Okay, I didn't hear it, sorry.
That's okay. I just made that. That's now my new noise.
Okay, noise works. I was one of many in the cages, each with their own story. Days went by, the food kept coming. I grew stronger. Occasionally, a human family came to look at us, and a distant memory nagged. The other dogs barked, begged, and pleaded. I refused. I knew only food and water, life and death. Thinking about my escape, my body changed.
I'll go first. This started off really interesting for me, but once we got down to after the human came shortly after, I was carried and taken. Then I felt like, okay, there are far too many of the personal pronoun I's. I felt like we were getting into the same sentence structure, the same language, and I felt like to hold my interest, I needed to see a lot more variety there. I felt like, as interesting as this was, and some of the repetitious struggle in the beginning, I felt like worked, but after that, we needed a departure from it because it was beginning to be too sing-songy for me anyway, and just too much I right branching sentence one right after the other. So that's why I finally just said, okay, I have to stop here.
Yeah, I can't say that I have much more to add, Tracy, to what you said so well. It was very similar, my experience as well. I will say also that once it was indicated that the narrator, I mean, you get a sense from what's being said that the narrator is not human, but that once the narrator indicates that something else is human, that tells me that the narrator is not. I start to think, what unhuman thing talks like this? And like, and I'm not at all suggesting like turning it into some sort of crazy, caveman speak or something like that. But it just like, I was like, okay, there's an opportunity to sort of dehumanize the language a little bit more, make it maybe a little more foreign or unusual because it's from a different perspective than an individual that uses English syntax the way it's presented here. I will say that there was examples of different sentence lengths in here that I really like, and it broke up some of the long sentences with shorter sentences, and I like that change. I think that really helps. Like, me and my hunger is a great place to put a short sentence to really pop it. And I'm just calling that out as an example of something I was suggesting earlier. But like you, Tracy, the sentence structures are very similar. I, verb, blah, 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 I, verb, blah, blah, blah. So it just,
And this is one of the problems, or one of the challenges, whenever we do go into the first person point of view. We have a tendency to think that every sentence has to include the I. In fact, memoirists, emerging memoirists make this mistake constantly. I know I did, and everyone's work I see in the very first drafts are doing the same thing. They think, well, the story's got to be about me, and I'm always told, in first person,
right.
It's got to be enough of me on the page. So it's I, and they forget that you can write sentences because it's all in your mind anyway. So you can just reveal what the scene is without using I saw that or I heard that. So at any rate, I just wanted to add that that happens to be kind of a glitch, or can be a tick when someone is writing in first person point of view.
I totally see where both of you are coming from, and your ideas are absolutely correct, I think, in what you're saying. I'm a sucker for an animal story. And so I bought it.
Right. Especially if it's dog adjacent. I'm the same way.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah.
a dog person.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is a dog. I love it.
However, because given, and I probably could have done a whistle on, it needs to be more doggy. It needs to be more, the dog needs to be, the bitch needs to be more amazed by the world that she's being exposed to. Like, how does she know that I can get that she knows that the blanket smells of fields, but what does she know about the back of a truck? How does she know she's in the back of a truck? So that's a animal tick that you could kind of fix, but I think it would just be huge fun to keep on working with this.
I never thought much about writing from the point of view of an animal until I read a grad school professor's phenomenal work. And I can't think of the name of it right this second. It just went out my mind. But his name, if you want to look him up, is Pinckney Benedict. He was teaching in the Queen's program. Now he teaches it in the summer program at Hollins, but then he teaches full-time at Southern Illinois, Carbondale. And he's a fantastic creative writer. But he wrote an amazing piece of work from the point of view of a dog. And holy cow, I mean, it's riveting. So if you want to look up something like that to see how someone else has done that, then you might consider Google searching his name, Pinckney Benedict, and you'll find a great example from him, I'm sure. He's one, I don't know how many.
Well, the thing is, it's a fun exercise. I think it's a good thing to pursue. There are so many animal lovers out there who would love to read a book from a point of view of a dog or a cat or.
Okay, we are going to go now to, what is this? This is number 24.
Okay, this is called Will. Hold up your head, Will. He didn't hear me, and his head dropped under the water. I inched closer to the hole, and the ice fluttered with a current that was tugging at his cap and at him, enough to wash him away. I knew he was trapped, alone in the water and ice, but I couldn't stop the jerky movement of my body toward him. I stretched out my arm, trying to get close enough. Here! He was choking, blue and eyes wide, and his hat came off and floated away, while my edge of the ice was thin, ready to crack. I remembered Archie's puppy, the lifeless sack of fur scooped up in our neighbor's garden rake. I forced my arm closer and stretched. This reach was only enough to touch the spongy wool collar of Will's jacket, not his ear or his hair, but I held onto that inch of navy and shifted my body. The ice didn't give way, but it wouldn't hold me. It was floating under me, an empty sled sliding down an icy hill. I pulled on his collar. Is that a sound? And I heard him call my name from under the ice. I pulled with both hands, and his face came up in a sucking wail. The ice wheezed and tore at us, and I swallowed the lake and went under with Will's head in my hands.
Okay, like you guys, I found this riveting too. I kept going, and then I kept thinking, where's page 2? Where's page 2?
I know.
Yeah.
My only grumbling about it, because it had so much nice tension and so many wonderful descriptions, was where are we? I mean, I know that we're on ice, but I'm not grounded in any sort of sense of time or exact place or anything. So I felt a little on thin ice myself. to keep that metaphor, I felt a little on slippery thin ice myself, because I felt like pretty soon I better be grounded here, because right now I'm giving it all. I'm going with the writer, the narrator, because it's just so gripping. But where the heck are we? So that was my only grumbling to it.
Mhm.
Maybe there's an opportunity with the title.
Mm.
Only because I was schooled long ago to not like, if you're going to put the same word in the title that's basically in the first line, you're sort of misusing real estate. There's a chance to deliver another piece of information there that's not on the page.
Well, and the other thing I'll say about this is that while that may be a good opening line, hold up your head, Will, I know plenty of writers, especially, and since we've already mentioned Mystic River, I'll say Dennis Lehane, who says never, ever, ever, ever start anything with a line of dialogue, because there's no context for it. So then you've got to kind of go back. Now, in this particular case, it was so good, I didn't have to go back to figure out who Will was, because we're just continuing to go. So in that particular case, I might argue with Dennis if he were listening. But I know him, and I know he would say, "Oh, never start anything with a line of dialogue because you give no context. Giving some context would have given some room for maybe kind of grounding us a little bit more.
Mm.
And we are going with, all stick together, number 17.
Okay, this is a poem. It's called Wild Gardens. On late summer afternoons like this, now in my 78th year, the mellow light of summer on the leaves of the trees around my house calls back many summers when the day carried me through the lazy hours. Like this afternoon, emptied of the present, requiring nourishment from the past. Time is an illusion, and if this is so, memory brings me the present, though it happened long ago. Accuracy of facts slides away, and impressions remain. Long-haired women lounging in a hammock, quiet sounds of insects dreaming of love and water, perhaps lapping nearby. This remains, but to go there now, the house would have rotted in surrounding vegetation, or an eager city would have consumed the vines, replacing them with bare sunlit grass. The yard now tamed by rocks and the occasional small questioning tree. No place here for companionship or solitude, nor for the quiet contemplation of death, nor the question whether to worship God. The sun beats down on the swimming pool, where the childless matron spends her break from work alone, sipping alcohol from a plastic cup.
I should say I blew my whistle.
Oh, okay.
I just had a problem with it as a poem, in part because of the way it's laid out on the page. I didn't understand the line, and y'all can't see this, I'm sorry, but the lines are really, really long. I didn't understand the line lengths and the line breaks.
It didn't feel purposeful anyway.
It didn't feel thoughtful or purposeful, right? I couldn't figure it out. It seemed more like a prose meditation to me than a poem. It didn't have poetic elements that would have made it a poem. Nice meditation. Loved the ending.
You know, the line break is one of a poet's greatest tools.
Yeah.
For determining how a piece is read, how it's viewed on a page, but more in particular, how it's read and therefore how it's received. So when, as a poet, we don't take advantage of one of our most significant tools in the toolbox, then I feel like we're just leaving too much out there, you know, that's not helping it as much as it could. And so if I were to go through and change line breaks and it might have a little bit more oomph and power to it for me. But I was willing to go through and read it all the way through.
As I was, but then in the end, I thought if I'm gonna think of it as a poem, it doesn't look like a poem or feel like a poem. It doesn't. There's so many more poetic tricks that it could play on me or gimmicks that it could put in front of me that would help with meaning.
The things I thought about when I was listening to this poem was something that's called release of information, which is what are we being told and at what point in the poem. And I mentioned this maybe in the last one where we talked about will, and thinking about this poem being a single page poem. So that's our real estate. So one of the things that helps readers often, and Tracy, you've already alluded to this or mentioned this, is like very concrete things at the beginning. So if you were to consider revising this piece, one of the things I would suggest you, the poet, think about is putting all of the descriptive things that are occurring at the top. So sort of take us through this space about being outside, all of those things, and pull out all of the commentary about it, about time being an illusion or accuracy of facts slide away. That's all very abstract and cerebral. So give us a lot of the concrete, then shift to this cerebral consideration of what we've just seen, and then come back to that really great ending back in the concrete, the sun beats down. You know, so we go from this visual to this thought point back to the visual, and that's like the button. You know what I mean?
That would be very powerful.
Totally
Yeah.
agree.
Because there's great stuff in here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it might help the poet realize they're using what we've talked about with line break. There's a lot of language in here that doesn't need to be here because we're making, you know, standard sentences. And as poets, you know, yeah, you want to use standard sentences when you can, but you don't have to. And so when we talk about the tricks in poetry, that's one of the nice things. You can use a line break instead of conjunctions or whatever, you know, all those other little helper words can go away and you can really pare it down. One of the things that might work too is this is honestly, go through and see what words you use more than once. If you're thinking about a poem being such a tight, you know, piece of machinery, then any word that's used more than once, if it's not like a helper word like the, that sort of thing, why are you using that? Why does the word occur more than once in the poem? Because if it's deliberate, leave it. But if it isn't, push yourself to find another word to do the same work. And you might surprise yourself in that exercise that you find language that you weren't even considering that opens up a whole different aspect to the poem.
All right. Next one is going to be 21.
21. All right, this is called Swept Off Her Feet, June 29th, 1957. In Pottsville, Pennsylvania, Janie Hilliard was having fun on a Saturday night. The Kit Kats, a New York band, were great, and she had danced a lot. She and her boyfriend, Bobby Klinger, did the hour drive from Hazleton, although this time it was separately. Rather than 2 a.m., Bobby had to leave at midnight for his shift at Spalding's, an industrial bakery in Hazleton. Making hot dog and hamburger rolls was a good paying summer job, especially 4th of July week when he earned doubled his hourly rate. Tonight, he'd work 18 hours. After Bobby left, Janie hung out with local friends. Around 1:30, she decided to leave. Getting home and in bed by 3 a.m., she wouldn't make it to church with her family, but she'd make it to their house for lunch. Her mom and dad usually saw her during the week, too, at Smoke's restaurant in Cybertsville, where she had waitressed since high school 2 years ago. A last look in the mirror, touching up her lipstick, dark brown hair, big blue eyes, nice figure, long legs, still looking good. She had been homecoming queen and captain of the majorettes. Outside the nightclub, she had a dark walk back to her car. Despite the warm night, she felt a little chill. Her high heels clicked along the sidewalk. Both sides of the street were lined with cars and taller, dark buildings. She hurried up the pace. Suddenly, from behind, a cloth covered her mouth and nose. It smelled like nail polish, but sweet too. She couldn't break loose. Her arms were firmly pinned to her sides. She was being dragged toward the street, her feet resisting. Struggling, she started to feel dizzy and tired. She was trying to break loose. It was everything went black.
Agree. I wasn't paying attention to that as an issue. I was enjoying the precision of the detail and the place, and feeling good about that. And I just, when I got to the end of it, I was so good. I love a cliffhanger, and to get you a good cliffhanger on the first page is pretty impressive. But I agree with the phrase, too much telling and no showing, too much exposition. It's going to be good. It's going to be good somewhere.
Yeah, it's necessary, obviously.
Yeah, keep in mind little things like, you know, if they had danced a lot, then maybe show us, you know, in the what kind of music was it? Instead of just saying the band was great, what kind of music? What is the song? What's Bobby? swinging her around too, and then he said goodbye and he has to leave. And I mean, give us a quick little scene that sets things up without just telling. The band was great. Bobby had to leave at midnight. You know, I hope you see the difference. We see a lot of positive stuff here, and
Yeah.
we want to, you know, we wanted certainly to know more, but just give us more of the showing up front rather than the telling.
Well, I think, yeah, so that it's just action, 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 wham, somebody's nabbed her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you, publishers, they first of all, they don't want to see any backstory in the first 10 pages at least. And they really want to be dropped right into the middle of something that is going on right then. And if it's not, they're not going to pay. I mean, they're half the time they won't even finish the page. So page one. So there's kind of like a page one rule that publishers have. So just keep that in mind. They want to see that showing.
We are going for number 14.
14.
Number 14.
Number 14 is called Sketches in Bronze. They're coming. It won't be long now. No more sitting on an inferior throne beside a drunken fool. An end to shabby furnishings and second-rate standing among world empires. A new regime is about to begin with herself at its head. The horde was spotted hours ago, sending ephemeria and fortress folk up onto the roof. Everyone wanted to witness the Victorian Achaean army. There will be a sting in the celebration that only she knows, she and her brother-in-law, Eshlewan. She pictures him leading the troops home, erect in the commander's chariot, a stance adopted to inspire confidence in soldiers who had lost their king. His expression, also adopted, serious, veiled. She can make out the glint of metal now. For years, she's been present at her husband's triumphal marches, and that first gleam always made her shiver with dread. She could foresee the moment when Helenus would lay rough hands on her after a blessed respite. This time will be different. She wonders, is that two? She wonders if the
Yeah. Noise.
I will say that as an agent, I probably would not have gone past the first paragraph. And the reason is because of the way that it's set up. They're coming, exclamation point, it won't be long now. And then we start to go backwards and we start to, you know, give some details, although it's still kind of sketchy. And I don't feel like I'm getting enough sensory stuff. I'm just getting details and I'm not really into the story. In other words, I'm not getting pulled into the story enough where I can just relax as a reader and feel I'm in the hands of a masterful storyteller. So I think the material is probably going to be fascinating, but I feel like as an agent, I would have to work a little bit more than I have time to help the writer get there at this point for me. So that's why I blew fairly early.
Yeah, this is similar to something we saw earlier in today's session, where it's a lot of exposition, and I just need a break from that mode of information being delivered to me to a different way of getting information. So if it's a conversation between two people, if it's just a little bit of a dialogue back and forth, and if the person's alone, maybe, you know, introducing someone that allows them to say some of the things that are being narrated. I don't know. It's a lot of the same kind of like, and here, and then this, and then this, and then this. And so I know that the table is being set for me, but it feels like it's just a lot of like the same way of putting things out on the table. And as a reader, especially in the premise, you know, like I'm looking for something to grab me, you know what I mean? And to pull me in.
Yeah, if we know that they're coming, how do we know that they're coming? Why not just start us there?
Mhm.
You know, that, you know, the first trumpet blew and blah, 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 you know, and just start us right there with details that tell us that we know they're coming rather than just saying they're coming. So those are the little types of things that we as agents are looking for, that we want to be dropped into a story that's immediately showing us instead of the character telling us. is
Yeah.
deep.
She can make out the glint of metal now.
Yes.
Okay. That's like, we're there. It's the moment. This is like, that's a sentence
Yeah.
that has a little more of, I think, what we're talking about.
Even if it's the returning army was, visible through, she could, whatever. She could
Mhm.
see the metal glint from the sun of the
Right.
returning army, whatever. But that drops us in instead of they're coming.
Mhm.
Yeah. And another thing I felt about it, I really enjoy a piece that's in the present tense.
Yeah.
That's immediacy.
Yeah.
It can be wonderful, but this isn't firmly, clearly in the present tense because she's not, it's not exactly backstory, but she's switching back and forth between where they might have been and what's going to happen next. And it's just the tense is one indicator of the kind of problem you two are both talking about.
That's a great point, Judith. Yeah.
If you look at stories like this, if you try to envision what it would look like if it were on a movie screen,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
how, they say in screenwriting, the first 10 minutes tell you everything you need to know for the rest of the movie. So if it's a commercial film, as opposed to, not, but most are. So anyway, if you take the 10-minute rule, how would you see this unfold? And what details and, who would be talking and dialogue? You're not going to know in the first 10 minutes, you're not in her head, in that character's head. So you're not going to know what she's been used to. You see what I'm saying? You're not going to know what she's been present all this time. So what in that opening needs to unfold that's going to carry that writer all the way through the book? What, just as if it were a movie.
Number four.
The woman awoke with a start in the quiet room. The man breathing softly beside her didn't stir. She lay there, looking into the darkness, waiting for the sound that had roused her out of the night's fitful dreams. And then she heard it, soft yet distinct, the soft steps of him walking in his bedroom above the one she shared with husband, her son, her late son, Jacob. Every night, as she lay in this bed, as she has laid almost every night for every day of his life, including the 9 months before he had emerged, wet and loud, beautiful, into this ugly world, she had been connected to those four walls directly above her bedroom and the precious one who slept there. Every night, she would reminisce, playing every scene she could recall, trying to reclaim the sounds and smells of his babyhood, the day that she and husband, brought that little 7-pound, 3-ounce bundle of love to his crib for the first time, the hours of rocking and feeding and changing him, watching him learn her voice, her face, watching as he began to learn the world, from strolls in the park to his first day of school, to his first soccer practice, to his first driver's license. Visits to Santa Claus and grandparents, and finally the ocean. Every new discovery he made, she rediscovered too.
Noise.
Okay. Every new friend she made, she prized as her own. Every new school was hers as well. She lived and breathed through him and his life. But then it was over. All she could remember were the times she had failed, all the times she had chosen herself over him, how she let husbands get him up on the weekends instead of her, choosing sleep.
I want to get back to the bedroom and the noise upstairs before I leave the first page. And I appreciate everything that's on this page. I think it's artistry sort of filling in a picture for me, which I love. Careful, you like to use long sentences, Mr. Person writer. So watch yourself with those. They can get away from you. And they ask your reader, when you use a long sentence like that, you're asking you're like, it's like putting things in someone's arms. You're like, here, hold this, and they don't get to put it down until the period. And so think about it in that way. So I'm holding this and holding this and holding this and holding this. And so in some cases, I think there's a chance to do shorter sentences, just to sort of give your reader a little breather. But I want to get back to the room with the noise upstairs before I leave the first page.
Yeah, this would I can tell you immediately a publisher would say, okay, we're already going into backstory. We're going into something, you had me in that opening paragraph,
Yeah.
Upstairs, but then here we go, right into backstory, and I'm not even past the first page. So that's something to keep in mind. I know it seems frustrating that not everything should be so prescriptive,
Right.
in terms of writing, but kind of I mean, there's a reason why they say that. We have reading habits, and reading these days, readers expect things faster, 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 unfortunately. There is a lot of beauty going on this page, a lot of wonderful things, in terms of watching him learn her voice, her face. I really loved that. And watching as he began to learn the world. But again, keep in mind, backstory is too immediate, and I'm right there with Noah with what's going on upstairs. That's if we're going to start with that, we need to carry it at least through the first page.
I was really drawn to this because my book club just read a couple of months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, Toni Morrison's Beloved, which is the most incredible ghost story ever.
Right.
And so I wanted to see how this would get handled. And what I do like about it, although I agree with your point, both of you, that it's backstory, but it's emotional backstory. And
Yeah.
I was engaged by the emotion, which gets left out. And if just for display purposes in turning this into us, you could have just stopped. The author could have just stopped with those last 2 lines, and all she could remember were the times she had failed, all the times she had chosen herself over him, and my heart was just hurting. So there's some really powerful stuff. Well worth the trouble it's going to be to make some changes, if you are willing to do that, because and also just be aware of, and I didn't beep in on this, a couple of errors in the second paragraph. Every night as she lay in this bed, which is correct, as she had laid almost every night for every day of his life, that should be lain.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're losing that distinction in our language, in contemporary, I mean, colloquial language, but I don't think you can overlook it in something this formal. And there are a couple of other.
And we don't even need the word lane. We could just say, as she had, almost every night for every day, so we don't even need lane there if it feels too archaic to the writer.
Yeah.
We are going with number 19.
Okay, staircase. I have a terror of falling down my stairs, missing the bottom tread to avoid stepping on a cat and breaking my knee, of hurrying at the winder where it narrows halfway down, or the phone rings and I run for it, catch a heel, grab for the banister, miss, or taking a misstep at the top and tumble down, cartwheeling my arms, cracking my back, crashing in a lumpy carcass, lying there for hours, blood oozing from my skull, crying out, not heard, not being able to cry out, not being seen, not found, being found, dying, being found living, broken, beyond repair.
I love this poem. I love so much about this poem. So I'll just jump in if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah.
You guys can't see the structure, but one of the things that I loved about it was this musing about the terror of falling, and because of the poet's use of enjambment, then it almost mimics a tumble from the beginning all the way down until the end, broken beyond repair. So it's almost kind of like a hypochondriac, worried about falling. But it's the enjambment makes it just very, very powerful. I loved the alliteration that we kept getting throughout. The ending was just, to me, was just amazing. Being found, dying, being found, living, broken beyond repair. I just thought that was gold. That was the sticking moment in the gymnastic routine. I was like, whoa, stuck the landing.
Same thing. Also, the way the stanzas start to unravel as you get to the bottom of the page seem to mimic a little bit about what's happening in the poem, and also really highlight the things that are being said on those, single line stanzas. I will ask the poet to think about another way of doing this poem, but look for those ing words because they're throughout the whole piece. And I feel like you absolutely want to keep them, of course, at the end for being, but you may have a little more impact at that end if you sort of pull back on the ing words prior to it. And you might find that the language gets a little sharper if you say something like crack my back, crash in a lumpy carcass.
Ooh. Yeah.
As opposed to those ing words. So that's an opportunity. And then the ing sound is only, is rare, but is only being used for being. You know what I mean? So when you get to be and the repetition of being, it's special.
And it echoes back to falling.
Correct. Oh, nice. Yes. Right. Yeah.
And I would add that this is just so tiny, but in the line to avoid stepping on a cat, I would have the poet consider stepping on the cat, just because it just brings it to something a little bit more specific, because either there's a cat there or there's not. But then it kind of tells the reader that this is a narrator who has a lot of things going on, always worried about something and every single possible obstacle. So I would have it be the cat instead of a cat. That's very tiny, but no, I think you're spot on.
Thanks.
Well, I look at it and wonder, there aren't any like poetic devices in it, of images and things. It's so plain.
Really? You think so?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It wasn't for me. I thought it
It
was.
does. Well, I mean, I'm just saying, no metaphor, no simile, just plain, kind of shock and awe, but no poetic devices.
Okay, yeah, I can see what you mean by that. I mean, when I think of poetic devices, I'm thinking of the enjambment, which is controlling the rhythm and the flow of the poem, which is a very, very powerful tool. So, it's got some very powerful line breaks. But yeah, I mean, I see what you mean by that. But I think for me, that was one of you're right. If they could have found some way, except that broken beyond repair is a pretty, pretty powerful metaphor.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Means an awful
on
a lot of different levels, for me anyway.
Something about about that final line, broken beyond repair. There's something you might consider. This was a tip that was given to me once by a teacher. This idea of repair is very provocative, and particularly as we apply it to bodies as opposed to like mechanisms. And so what I was given as a suggestion is, now that we know this is where the poem is going to sit at its ending, perhaps there's something with the idea of repair that could be introduced at the beginning in a revision, that might be something about broken, or something about, tightening, or, something that's in the family of the idea of repair, so that we leave that idea, it's sort of slipped in at the beginning, we don't even notice it, but then when we get to repair at the end, it's sort of an echo of, oh, they said that thing at the beginning, and so it feels very deliberate. Where it's at the time that you read the poem, you're just sort of experiencing it. But then when you get to repair at the end, you realize, oh, look, it calls back to this image at the beginning that is related to the word repair.
Would it be too predictable to have the staircase itself in need of repair at the beginning?
Like that's what I was thinking. That's exactly right. Like, it's like the broken step.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then it's the body that's broken.
The faulty railing, or
Right.
the
That sort of thing.
the give and the
so
railing.
suddenly it's not this, right, it's no longer the thing that's broken, it's the person, you know what I mean? And so that gives it a little bit of a, I don't know the right word for it. I'm just going like this, a little bit more of a, like that feeling of like, oh, you know what I mean? So that, how poems have that sort of like inevitable surprise, like you're surprised and at the same time you're like, of course. You know what I mean? And that's one of the ways that I was taught, that by another poet who said, like, this is one thing you might consider doing. And so you give your reader that sort of like, oh, of course, oh,
like there was already something broken.
Right.
Yeah, the only thing about that I wonder is, does it diminish the psychological aspect of this particular narrator in the poem, who obviously has a fear,
right,
has lots of fears going on? So, I definitely I see where that's going, and I really like that idea. But I wouldn't want to see, if it's necessary, the psychological aspect.
Right.
Because obviously this is somebody who's ruminating on all the ways.
Right. Right.
I could go too fast. Their phone might ring. I mean, there are all these little psychological fears and things that are going on. So, which I found delicious, but that was just me. But yeah, I like how you would bring it back to that repair from the beginning.
Very interesting.
I just thought there was so much here, so much good going on, and working on a lot of different levels for me.
Yes.
Let's go with number 1.
Oh, look at that.
Number 1.
Okay. A 13-year-old Jody grabbed a straw hat and stepped outside. It was 7 a.m. She already knew another scorcher lay ahead. Sticking her head back inside, she called to her younger sister. "Get your hat, Stace. Daddy wants us out in the field early. If we get in enough time, we won't have to go back out this afternoon." Jody and Stacy were 2 years apart, inseparable except at school where they had friends of their own. Otherwise, they stuck together, slept in the same bed, and shared deep, deep, important secrets. Stacy was afraid of the dark, and no one knew that but Jody. Southern men behaving like immature boys made sport of teasing children. Stacy's secret was safe with Jody. Grabbing their hoes, the sisters headed toward the south field. Farm work had made them lean and muscular, and they strode across the field with rhythm and purpose. Cotton was just sprouting, and being carefully trained, the girls could discern what to chop and what to leave. Looking upward, Stacy remarked, "I've never seen the sky look like this. Looks like a big old bruise, doesn't it?" The girls could see Maria and Carlos already in the field. They didn't have the privilege of working only till noon. Their skimpy pay required a full day and beyond just to eke out a living. At the edge of the field, a porter crib sat in the shade. Jody and Stacy could hear the 1-year-old girl whining and babbling. "Hola," Maria called out. She pointed to the sky and shrugged. Looking up, Jody shrugged in response. "Something's different this morning," she said. The workers lowered their heads and began chopping in sync, as if hearing the same drummer.
I thought it was interesting. I was willing to go along and see where this was going to go. I liked the nice tension at the end. I was a little confused about the insertion of with secrets, Southern men behaving like
Yes.
immature boys. Yeah.
Me too. That's
Made,
so interesting. Me too. I was just like, you know, I just
I was
highlighted
reading
it.
your mind.
Just like pull that out. You don't need that. Like,
Yeah.
I appreciate. Yeah. Sorry, Tracy. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say. I mean, it was in there. I think for a reason, and maybe if it was in there to kind of insinuate that there's something we need
Right.
to, something's being planted. Because remember, plant, return. Plant. You're planting seeds here. You're a writer. So everything on that first page goes into that proverbial VW bus, or in Noah's, analogy, in the arms, right? They take
Right.
the ferry all the way through. So I thought, is that a mistake that that's in there, or is that in there for a reason? But I took something like sinister, sexual, something going on when you got secrets, young girls, and Southern men.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought, I wasn't sure about that, but I wanted to at least bring it up, right? No,
Yeah.
at least bring it up to say that's where
Right.
what's going on there. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And when I first read it, um, I read it as Mario and Carlos because I thought those would be the men that were referenced. But then I was like, oh, I made a mistake. That's not right. And then and so yeah, I just think like it's doing some work that's obviously important to the story. You know, I get that, but it's maybe not in the best spot
Yeah.
because I like being with the two girls. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
like,
I think we need to watch for expository dialogue that happens right there in the very beginning. Daddy wants us out in the field early. If we get in enough time, we won't have to go back out this afternoon. Remember, anytime you're telling something like that, it's called expository dialogue. Sometimes you can't get out of with it or away from it, but I think we ought to be able to avoid it at least in the first paragraph. Some of that could be down below where their skimpy pay required a full day, and then, the girls, and then somehow insert that the girls are going to be able to get out this afternoon. But anytime I hear expository dialogue that early on, my warning signals go up like, okay.
I was I agree about that second paragraph. It's just shorten it. But what I liked here was the tone. It was suitable for young girls their age. I felt like I was on a farm, that modern suburban life wasn't intervening in any misuse of words, just like another scorcher lay ahead, that kind of language. Um, and it just seemed to understand and present us very plainly with the world they lived in, with no bells and whistles. Um, and then I guess the phrase that I liked best in that whole page was, looks like a big old bruise, doesn't
yeah,
it?
Yeah, that
That's
was
just
good.
a perfect line of dialogue, but that's
And it's another hint, I'm wondering.
yeah,
Sinister that it's a bruise, right? Go
yeah.
ahead.
And but I mean, it looks like here comes a thunderstorm,
right.
maybe even a tornado.
Mhm.
But the language is very colloquial, rural, unadulterated, believable.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I'll bring up, because we might not get to all the stories today, and I noticed in a few others that this was cropping up, and I see this all the time in a lot of the submissions I get from folks who want to be clients and want representation. A lot of sentences that begin with the word it. Now, in this case, it's just the second sentence. It's not a big deal, but I thought I would bring it up because in other pieces, I noticed it showing up a lot. And it becomes almost like this tick that writers will get where I've gone before and I've highlighted like 15 places on one page that will use the word it. So it doesn't in this case, so that's wonderful. But there's so many ways to start a sentence. And so anytime I see sentences that begin with the word there, THERE, or it, I'm like, come on, this writer is so good. This writer can do better than that. You know, so there's so many more creative ways to open sentences than with, I think, nothing words. So keep that in mind. Every time you're every time you have this inclination to start a sentence with it or THERE, I hope you'll think about me.
We work on this in my critique group, and it's just like it is a tick. It can be a tick. And what we're kind of encouraging each other to do is do a word search,
Yeah. Yes.
chapter by chapter. Just get
Yeah.
rid of them
Yeah.
and find another way to get through that idea in that sentence.
Yeah.
Because it sounds, the problem with it is it sounds colloquial
Right.
and it sounds relaxed and it's flat and dull and boring.
Tracy, you taught me once at a different slush pile that stories that start at the beginning of the day, you always gotta sort of look at them twice. Like usually the first time someone gets, sort of, journeys into writing something, they're like, the story starts with the character opening their eyes. Today the stars. So it's something I notice about this story. I like what's going on this page, but because I know we won't get to every story today, I want to put that out there too. That
That's a good one.
like always, starting the first at the beginning of the day. Sometimes there's a little more of an interesting way to open up the scene, even if it is occurring at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, agree. And I'm so glad you remembered that. But let's also notice, since we're talking craft in general, let's also notice that we're dropped right into a scene here, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
this is what we mean by showing us. Now, there was the telling of Daddy wants us in there's that exposition coming in, and then we're getting some of this. They're a couple of years apart, but it's short, and so we're into scenes and things are moving.
Yes.
And they're moving forward, and that's what your publishers want to see. They want to see that you've grabbed their attention. Now you're moving them forward into the story.
Yeah.
And to that, literally by the third paragraph, they grabbed their hose.
Right. Exactly. Like there's this really great stuff about Jody and Stacy in the second paragraph that's a little backstory, but it's enough for me to get a sense of the two of them. You know what I mean? It's perfect. And then, like you said, Judith, then they grab the hose and they move on. So it really has that momentum that I think I know I have asked for in earlier examples that we've looked at today. This is a nice example of that, like a little bit just to sort of, color in the lines a little bit and then get me back into the scene, give me a little bit more. Yeah.
Very good. I want to again thank our judges, Judith, Tracy, and Noah, for all the great insights into the pieces that were read, and Stevie for being our reader today. And thanks everybody for being here and participating, and everybody who did send in an entry. So thank you very much.